Hey guys, tonight we're peeling back the velvet curtains of medieval castles. Not to show you gold or grandeur, but the dim, drafty corners where women lived lives that were far from fairy tales. Picture this. You wake up on a straw mattress that smells faintly of mold, surrounded by walls so thick you can't hear the birds outside. The air is cold, even in summer, and your breath fogs slightly as you sit up. Your chamber pot is full. The fire's gone out. And it's only Tuesday. You live in a castle. That should sound impressive, right? Except here, being a woman inside one of these limestone fortresses isn't a regal fantasy. It's more like slow-motion imprisonment with a few velvet cushions to make the cell seem pretty. You probably won't survive this, but hey, at least the embroidery is exquisite. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'll be curious to know where you're tuning in from tonight. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet hit the floor, stone of course, and the chill climbs right into your bones. Castles weren't designed for comfort. They were military fortresses first, royal residences second, and women's havens, well, never. The walls are cold in summer and colder in winter. The narrow windows don't let in much light, and when it rains, you'll swear it's raining inside too. The ceilings drip, the floors creak, and you share your chamber with spiders the size of your thumbnail and the occasional rat bold enough to scurry across your rush-covered floor. And then there's the smell. Forget scented candles. Your olfactory experience consists of chamber pots, smoke from the hearth, stale meat, and the sharp ammonia tang of unwashed bodies. If you're lucky, someone burned sage recently to cover it up. If not, welcome to Oda 14th century. Historians still argue whether noble women's chambers were significantly better than commoners, but most agree that even the finest rooms were a far cry from cozy. Sure, you might have a canopy bed with tapestries, but that's to block the wind, not make a Pinterest board happy. As you shuffle toward the fire, you notice your breath still fogging. You'll need your maid to bring hot coals to rekindle the hearth. Until then, you wrap yourself in a woolen shawl that's been mended so many times it's more patched than fabric. You consider going down to the kitchen for warmth, but remember, you're not supposed to be seen downstairs unless summoned. Your life is lived upstairs, in chambers and solars, like a house cat that no one quite knows what to do with. You'd think living in a literal castle would come with a few perks. A nice view, maybe, but all you can see from your tiny window slit is the gray of the outer courtyard. And even if you did wander outside, you'd be confined to the castle garden, walled in, carefully patrolled, mostly ornamental. Place to pace, not to roam. You can hear them already, the servants rustling awake, the distant clang of a pot, the rhythm of early morning labor. It's a soundscape you've grown used to, others working while you exist. You don't actually have a job here, not really. Not one that anyone would describe with verbs like create or build. Your role is more about being visible but not too loud, desirable but not indulgent, obedient but not pathetic. And even inside this cold stone womb, you're never really alone. There's always someone watching, a maid folding linens in the corner, a younger cousin visiting from another estate, an older matron inspecting your posture as you stitch. Privacy? Not unless you count the 10 minutes you get behind the curtain when you change clothes. And even then, you can feel the judgment from the other side of the fabric. One fringe account, possibly apocryphal but fun, claims that noble women in some castles trained pet squirrels to guard their jewelry because they trusted them more than their ladies-in-waiting. Whether that's true or not, the point stands. Trust is a luxury in castle life, and you don't get to have many luxuries. The only place truly your own is your mind, and even that's under siege from prayer, etiquette, and the whispered gossip of what's expected from you next. When you daydream, you don't imagine riding out on a white horse. You imagine slipping down a back stairwell, past the armory, into the woods. Alone. No gowns, no curtsies. Just you and the trees. But then the door creaks open, and the real world floods back in. Your maid arrives, her hands red from scrubbing in the kitchens, holding a jug of warm water for your face. You nod. She nods. No one smiles. It's too early for that. And besides, what's there to smile about? Because this castle, beautiful from the outside, regal in design, is not your palace. It's your container. Every corridor echoes with rules. Every meal is measured for appearances. Every gesture observed. You don't live in luxury. You survive in display. You step toward the window again, peer out at the pale sky. The guards change shifts. A dog barks. Somewhere a rooster crows. And you inhale the chill, wrap your shawl tighter, and prepare to endure another day in the stone womb. The bell rings, 3 steady clangs from the chapel tower. You know what that means, morning prayers. You sigh because you don't get to skip devotion, not even when you're tired, cramping, or dreaming of just 10 more minutes under the wool. You adjust your veil because heaven forbid anyone see your hair, and step into the corridor, feet already cold against the stone. There's no slipper thick enough for this floor. You descend the stairs carefully, like always. One slip and you're a scandal. A twisted ankle? Maybe. A miscarriage? Worse. You're a woman of rank now, and every step you take is a negotiation between your body and everyone else's expectations of it. You reach the chapel door. Time to be quiet, pious, and seen. The priest begins the chant. You mumble along, thinking about your stomach instead of salvation. Your wedding feast was 2 winters ago, and since then, your life has revolved around a single goal: produce an heir. Not a child, not someone to love. An heir, preferably male. Extra points if he has all his toes and doesn't scream too much. Marriage in a castle is a feudal chess move. You weren't married because someone fell for your smile by torchlight. You were bartered. Your dowry came with goats, land rights, maybe a border agreement. Your husband? A man 10 years older than you who barely makes eye contact and seems more interested in hawking than in you. On your wedding night, you were shuffled into a chamber and told to pray. For what? That he'd be kind? That it wouldn't hurt? That you'd conceive quickly and never have to do that again? Historians still argue whether medieval noblewomen were truly passive participants in these arrangements or whether some learned to leverage their influence behind the scenes. But the facts remain: your body isn't really yours. It belongs to your family line, to your husband's legacy, to the estate's future. Your monthly cycle is no longer just a private concern. It's a topic of whispered updates between chambermaids and senior matrons. The moment you miss a period, it's news. The steward starts prepping the nursery. The midwife is summoned. And if it's a false alarm, well, better luck next month, dear. Don't let anyone see the disappointment. And let's not pretend you're only evaluated for your fertility. Everything about your body is public performance. Too plump? You're lazy. Too thin? You're weak. Too outspoken? Dangerous. Too quiet? Useless. It's like living inside a tapestry. Everyone sees you, but you're flat, silent, stitched into a story you didn't write. You finish prayers and head toward the solar, your small sitting room. It's a rare place where you can recline, sip watered wine, and pretend your existence has softness. Today, your mother-in-law is already there. She's been watching you like a hawk since the wedding. She wants a grandchild. Yesterday. Have you eaten the rabbit broth? It's good for your humors, she says. You nod. You don't mention that it made you vomit. You look pale, she adds. Perhaps you should rest after embroidery, but not too much. Sloth dulls the womb. You smile with your lips only. She means well, but she also means business. In this castle, everyone does. There's a little-known account of a noblewoman in France who allegedly faked morning sickness to convince her husband she was pregnant, just to buy herself a few months of peace. It worked until it didn't. No baby, no excuse. She ended up shipped to a convent with her embroidery frame. So you don't fake. You wait. You track every twinge in your belly like a spy following footsteps in the snow. Is that nausea? Cramping? Am I not? The waiting is endless. You avoid hard cheese because someone said it closes the womb. You drink boiled sage. You pray not for the miracle of life, but for the absence of shame. And if you do get pregnant, oh, the celebration. A modest one, of course. Just enough to raise hope, not enough to tempt fate. You're assigned a midwife who inspects you like livestock. She mutters about your hips, your skin tone, the color of your urine. She prepares herbs you've never heard of and asks questions you're too embarrassed to answer. From that point forward, you're both sacred and fragile. The castle quiets around you, but it doesn't stop moving. You're still expected to be presentable, pleasant, and productive. Idle hands birth sick babies, they whisper. So you stitch and nod and smile through the nausea. You've never had so many people interested in your digestion. You can't even burp in peace without someone asking, "A sign, perhaps?" You want to scream, but screaming is undignified. There's a kind of funny cruelty to it. If you're too fertile, they say you're wild, maybe even touched by something demonic. If you struggle, they say you're cursed. Either way, the blame lives with you, never him. His seed is never questioned, only your soil. And if, God forbid, you miscarry, the silence is suffocating. There's no ceremony, no comfort, only whispers. Maybe you moved too fast. Maybe you didn't pray hard enough. Maybe it was your fault. You lie in bed with a hot cloth on your belly and tears in your throat. The midwife says nothing. The priest mumbles something about divine will. Your husband leaves the room. Your mother-in-law cries, not for your pain, but for the lost air. And then, you get up, wash your face, return to the solar, pretend it never happened, because there's no space for grief in a castle that runs on airs and obedience. You look out the window, squinting at the sky. Somewhere, someone is hawking in the fields. Somewhere, a lute is playing a soft tune. Somewhere, someone else is crying. But not you, not now. You sit down, pick up your needle and start again. Because your only job is to make heirs. And not die trying. You wake up aching again. Not just your back, but deeper, stranger. Like your body is trying to whisper something, but it doesn't know the right words. And guess what? It's your time of the month. Congratulations. You're bleeding in brocade. There's no stash of chocolate hidden under your bed. No heating pad. No bathroom to sneak off to. Just you, a coarse linen cloth, and maybe a small basket of clean rags your maid boiled the night before. Period care in the castle? A medieval horror show. You slide out of bed carefully, because leaking onto the mattress isn't just embarrassing. It's punishable in the court of noble decorum. These sheets are expensive, and so is your reputation. You clench, you pray, you waddle. Medieval noblewomen managed menstruation with homemade cloth pads, often fastened with linen ties or tucked into tight undergarments. Not that underwear was always guaranteed. Historians still argue whether women of your rank wore shifts with built-in supports or just free-bled into their layers. Either way, you're not exactly feeling elegant, especially when the cramps hit. There's no Midol, no hot bath. Baths, as we'll get to later, are a whole ordeal anyway. You reach for your usual cure. A warm cup of nettle and yarrow tea, passed down from some other miserable woman centuries ago. Tastes like boiled hay. You choke it down with practiced grace. Your maid eyes you cautiously. She knows the signs. Your pinched face, your hunched shoulders, the slow way you rise from your seat. Still, she doesn't say anything. No one does. You're expected to carry on, literally bleeding under your gown, because womanhood in the castle isn't a sacred thing. It's a quiet, leaky inconvenience wrapped in velvet and embroidered smiles. You dress slowly. Today's gown is layered, underdress, overgown, girdle. You wear dark colors to hide accidents. The corset laces tighter than you like, and your stomach rebels with a sharp jab. But there's a visitor arriving, and you can't miss your place at the welcome feast. Feasting while cramping? Just another Thursday. As you move down the corridor, you catch the scent of roasted venison. Your stomach churns. Not from hunger, from nausea. You're not pregnant, but the bloating is a cruel joke. Your bodice pinches tighter with each step. You sit through the meal quietly, chewing slowly, smiling faintly. A man across the table makes a joke. You force a laugh, but really, you're trying not to double over. A sharp stab twists your insides like a corkscrew. You grip your goblet tighter and think about lying down on cold stone just for the relief of stillness. Of course, this is only the beginning. Imagine being pregnant, then giving birth without a doctor. Midwives, often wise, often helpful, weren't miracle workers. They came with herbs, hands, and prayers, not antiseptics or anesthesia. Childbirth in a castle was medieval, and not in a cute, ye olde kind of way. There's a story from the 1300s, half forgotten in dusty chronicles, about a countess who labored for 2 days straight, only to die from bleeding out onto the rushes beneath her bed. Her body was wrapped in lavender to mask the smell before burial. No one talks about her name, just that she failed to deliver an heir. And even if you survive the birth, you might not survive the infection. Puerperal fever, retained placenta, hemorrhage. These words don't exist in your vocabulary, but the danger? That's written in every scream you've ever heard from the birthing chamber 2 halls down. Historians still argue whether upper-class women had lower maternal death rates thanks to better midwives, or if their risks were higher because of more frequent pregnancies. Either way, the math never really favors you. Let's not forget the bonus round, miscarriages. No ultrasounds, no warning signs. You'd be going about your day, bleeding silently into your gown, hoping it's just your cycle, until the pain comes, and the grief, and the silence. No one comforts you, not properly. You're expected to mourn in private, whisper a prayer, and get ready to try again. Because your worth isn't measured by how you feel. It's measured by what you produce. And still, your body is expected to be beautiful. Not functional, not exhausted, just beautiful. You're supposed to glide, to smile, to flatter and flirt just enough to remind everyone you're still useful. But how do you glide when your feet are blistered, your thighs chafe under 4 layers of wool, and your underdress smells like damp iron? There's a fringe theory, almost folklore, that some women smeared crushed mint leaves inside their undergarments to mask the smell of menstruation. Whether it worked or just left them tingling in all the wrong places, you'll never know. But it's the kind of desperate creativity you relate to now. You're bleeding, bloated, and bound in brocade, and you still have to dance at tonight's banquet. A lute player starts warming up. Someone's setting out goblets. You excuse yourself early, muttering something about your stomach. No one questions it too hard. They never do when it's a woman's issue. That's the only grace you get. Back in your chamber, you sit on the edge of the bed and stare at the coals in the hearth. They glow faintly, like your last bit of energy. You remove your girdle with a groan and finally lie back. The rush of relief is instant. You breathe. Tomorrow it'll start all over again. But for now, you close your eyes. Because even in the age of knights and banners, there's no armor for this kind of pain. You're up again, and today's misery isn't about blood. It's about fashion. Because you, my dear, are expected to dress like royalty, while moving like a mannequin and breathing like a corseted scarecrow. It's dress-up day, again. The first layer is your chemise. Plain, itchy linen, always slightly damp in the folds because, let's be honest, ventilation wasn't high on anyone's design priority list. Over that goes your undergown, something scratchy and russet or indigo, because modest elegance means you get to be uncomfortable in rich colors. Then comes the surcoat or overdress, often lined with fur if it's winter, or embroidery if it's summer and God has decided to test you with 34 degrees Celsius and no deodorant. Let's talk corsets. The type of corset you wear isn't Victorian. That's later. But you do have stays, lacing, and enough compression to make breathing a conscious act. You're expected to maintain an upright posture, not because it's good for your spine, but because slouching is for peasants and widows. Historians still argue whether these early stiff bodices were more decorative than restrictive, but judging by how your ribs feel, you'd vote for torture device. And don't even think about sitting down on the floor or bending over to pet a cat. You'll rip a seam, expose a garter, and end up as castle gossip before sunset. Next comes the headgear. You were probably hoping for a flower crown, but nope, you get the humble wimple. Imagine wrapping your face in linen, then adding a veil, then pinning it under your chin so tightly you can only chew sideways. You're dressed like a very elegant parcel, ready for delivery to the dining hall. Fun side note, the word wimple comes from Old English wimple, meaning to fold, which makes sense because everything on your body is folded, your dignity included. Why the fuss over covering your hair? because loose hair means loose morals, and heaven forbid a lock slips free at the wrong moment. One noblewoman's braid was once blamed for distracting an entire feast. The braid was blamed, not the ogling men. Classic. You walk stiffly through the hallways, trailing fabric like a nervous tapestry. Your train has picked up some hay from the rush-covered floors, and you're pretty sure someone's chicken just pecked the hem. Your elegance embodied, and being followed by poultry. Let's not forget your shoes. Pointed, delicate, impractical. They're often just leather soles with no support, and they slip on stone like greased piglets. Walking down the stairs? Better grab the banister and pray. Or better yet, make your maid carry you. Not that she has the strength or the permission. Quirky tidbit for the evening. There was once a brief fashion among noblewomen to wear polaines, those absurdly long-toed shoes, with chains attaching the tips to their garters to keep them from flapping. Yes, chain-linked footwear, because walking wasn't hard enough. But what's worse than the discomfort is the judgment. Dressing well isn't about beauty. It's about discipline. If you're rumpled, you're lazy. If you're too ornate, you're vain. If your veil is sheer, harlot. If your sleeves are plain, poor. If you show a glimpse of collarbone, might as well light the witch pyre yourself. Your wardrobe says everything about you. Not what you think or feel, but what you're worth, who owns you, and whether your husband's lands are flourishing this year. Every dress is a billboard for someone else's success. And there's no winning. Just yesterday, your sister-in-law wore her new embroidered sideless surcoat to chapel and was whispered about for hours. Too proud, they muttered. Too much ankle, as if her kneecaps held the power to summon plagues. You step outside into the courtyard for a breath of semi-fresh air. The breeze lifts your veil slightly, and a stable boy glances your way. You quickly tug it back into place. That moment might cost you a week of cold silence from your mother-in-law and a passive-aggressive sermon during prayers. This isn't about vanity, it's about survival. Your appearance is currency. Your presentation is proof that you are worthy, obedient, desirable, contained. There is no space in castle life for casual sweatpants or messy buns. You do not run errands in yesterday's shift. You do not just throw something on, ever. And don't think pregnancy gets you a pass. Pregnant women are expected to look even more regal, like sacred vessels of the future. There's no such thing as maternity wear. You just unlace your gown until it barely holds, and hope no one notices the sweat dripping down your back. Waddle gracefully, dear. Sometimes you wonder what it must be like to move freely, to feel the sun on your hair, to run barefoot through grass. But then you remember, grass stains don't wash out of velvet, and the castle seamstress already scolded you last week for tearing a hem during chapel genuflection. So you endure. You let the maid tighten your laces. You pin your wimple so tightly your ears fold. You carry yourself like a portrait, because being a woman here means being the frame, not the subject. You take one last look in the polished copper mirror. Your cheeks are flushed from effort, your eyes tight from the headache building in your temples. But you look appropriate. That's what matters, right? You smooth your sleeves and descend the stairs, your skirts whispering behind you like the ghosts of all the women who did this before you. The thing no one tells you about living in a castle is not your castle. Sure, you sleep in one of the upper chambers and have your own carved chest for storing precious linens. Maybe your initials are stitched into a velvet cushion, and the steward nods when you enter the hall. But let's not get confused. This castle doesn't belong to you. It belongs to your husband, or your father, or your lord, and they all make it known in 100 silent ways. You walk through a corridor lined with family tapestries, his family. Every face stitched in gold and vermilion stares down at you like a reminder. You're here to continue their line, not create your own. You're a recent acquisition, however well-dressed. Your blood has yet to prove its worth. Even your room, cozy by medieval standards, was once someone else's. Perhaps a cousin who died in childbirth, or a sister who was married off to some baron 2 counties away. Her initials are still carved into the beam above the hearth, if you look closely. And sometimes you do. Your days are a series of quiet permissions. You may sit here, but not there. You may enter this room, but only when summoned. You may speak, but only after your husband has been served wine and is in a good enough mood to tolerate your voice. Historians still argue whether noblewomen had more sway within castle life than the records suggest. Maybe you influence your husband's decisions, manage the household accounts, or broker soft diplomacy with neighboring ladies. But influence is not ownership. You can guide, hint, arrange, even plot, but the final word? Not yours. Let's say you want to redecorate the solar. The cushions are worn, the tapestry's fading. You mention it gently over dinner. Your husband raises an eyebrow, says something vague about wastefulness, then changes the subject. 2 days later, he commissions new antlers for the Great Hall. Priorities, apparently. You're expected to take pride in your home, but you don't get to decide how it functions. The steward manages the food stores. The bailiff oversees the lands. The priest watches the souls. And you make yourself useful by not making waves. Even the servants remind you where you stand. Oh, they bow. They smile. But it's your husband they obey. They've known him since birth. You arrived last winter with 2 trunks and a dowry. That makes you important but replaceable. There's an awkward tension in everything you do. You're above the kitchen girls, but you can't really talk to them. You're the lady of the house, but the wet nurse gets more time with your child. You're the mistress of the solar, but your husband's mother still checks in daily to make sure everything's just so. Today, she enters without knocking. Again, she inspects your sewing, tells you your stitches are too wide, offers to show you the correct way. You smile and nod, even as your fingers curl around the embroidery hoop. The castle is full of people, and yet you often feel invisible, or worse, watched. There's no such thing as alone. Servants pass through constantly. Pages run errands with clumsy feet. Priests make unexpected visits with spiritual concerns. Everyone has a reason to be in your space, and none of them need your permission. There's a weird kind of claustrophobia in castle life. Not just the thick walls or the narrow staircases, but the way your existence is constantly intersected. Every thought, every moment, every breath feels like it's being borrowed. And don't even think about secrets. A whisper travels faster than a sparrow in these halls. Did you sigh too deeply during morning prayers? Someone heard. Did your maid catch you reading a letter with flushed cheeks? She told the laundress, who told the cook, who told the stablemaster's wife. And now it's half the castle's favorite theory. A particularly juicy story from court tells of a noblewoman who tried to sneak a pet fox into her chamber, only to have it exposed within hours because a chambermaid spotted something fluffy under the blankets. The fox was removed. The woman was not allowed visitors for a fortnight, including her husband. Even your physical presence is policed. Want to go for a walk in the outer bailey? Take an escort. Want to ride a horse? Not without a groom, a second lady, and a vague promise to stay near the hedgerows. Want to open a window? Only if it won't let in poor air, which might be blamed for your next illness. And the castle isn't static. It's not a quiet stone sanctuary. It moves. It breathes. Cooks shout orders. Soldiers spar in the yard. Pages run with scrolls flapping behind them. Someone's always sweeping, stomping, slamming. It's less fairy tale and more anthill with hierarchy. Even the layout reinforces your place. The men's quarters are near the hall, the gate, the strategy rooms. Yours? Up high, tucked between the chapel and the nursery. You're close to God and children. How symbolic. Sometimes you wonder what would happen if you just left, slipped out through the postern gate in plain woolen clothes, rode away on a borrowed mule. Would anyone notice? Would they care? Probably. Not because they miss you, but because it would embarrass your husband. You stare out the window of the upper solar, where you can see the training yard below. Young squires are practicing sword forms, their shouts echoing off the stone. You used to imagine that kind of freedom, the weight of a blade, the wind in your hair. Now you just imagine the silence of a locked door. The castle may be impressive from the outside. Its towers scrape the sky. Its banners flutter like pride itself. But from in here, it's a monument to control. Every stone is someone else's rule. Every corridor is someone else's path. And you walk it quietly, gowned, laced, dignified, but never free. It's not that you dislike embroidery. There's something calming about the soft pull of thread through linen, the neat rows of tiny crosses blooming into vines or animals or saints. It's the only thing calming about your day, honestly. But that calm wears thin when you realize this is your life now. A loop of fabric, pattern that never changes, a needle pricking the same spot over and over until even your calluses get bored. Welcome to Castle Boredom, the genteel, gilded kind. You sit in the solar, surrounded by windows that don't open and other women who barely speak above a whisper. The only sound is the clink of a needle tin and the occasional page boy tripping over himself in the hallway. You're not allowed outside unescorted. You're not allowed to write letters without supervision. You're not even allowed to nap unless it's after dinner and modestly. You look at your tapestry, half-finished. It's meant to depict Saint Margaret. Right now, she looks more like a confused goose. But you keep going, because you have nothing else to do. Let's list your options. Embroider until your eyes cross. Read from the same devotional book for the 15th time. Practice lute. Badly. Pretend you're interested in lacework. Sit and wait for someone to need you. Historians still argue whether castle women actually had long stretches of free time or if managing the household was more labor-intensive than the records suggest. The truth likely depends on your rank. But either way, the mental cage remains the same. You are expected to be productive only in specific ladylike ways. Of course, you're not technically alone. The solar is rarely empty. Your ladies-in-waiting drift in and out, folding linens, sewing side by side, whispering half-thoughts about noble births and bands of marriage. But these aren't friends. They're closer to roommates with job descriptions and eyes everywhere. If you speak too freely, it might be repeated. If you sigh too deeply, it might be misinterpreted. There's no such thing as venting in a castle. Even your silences get noticed, especially by her, your husband's younger sister, who's 17 and somehow already better at cross-stitch than you. Today, she's humming, loudly, the same 3 notes, over and over. You try not to snap. She's not the problem. The structure is the problem. This is the part of castle life that fairy tales edit out. Not the danger, not the childbirth, but the monotony. You don't go on adventures. You don't solve riddles in the forest. You stay here, making saints out of thread and hoping someone visits with news from the outside world. And when someone does visit, well, that's its own minefield. Visitors mean conversation, but also comparison. If Lady Maud brings her embroidery hoop, you're suddenly in a silent contest of who stitches faster, cleaner, prettier. If she arrives in a new gown, your old one becomes vintage, and not in a cute way. If she knows the latest gossip from court, well, you'd better look interested but not too interested. There's a story about a duchess who asked one too many questions during a visiting bishop's tale about her cousin's annulment. Curiosity, they said, is unbecoming in women. Next week, she was sent to pray at a nunnery for clarity. So instead of asking questions, you smile and sip your watered wine. You nod at appropriate moments. You wait for your turn to share a dull anecdote about the new rooster in the courtyard. He crows 3 times now before sunrise, you say. Everyone smiles politely. Then silence returns. The lute sits in the corner of the solar like a chore no one wants to do. You used to practice, truly, but castle walls turn sound into shame. One missed note echoes forever. The steward walked past once while you were learning scales and said it sounded like a cat disagreeing with God. You haven't touched it since. Some days, the boredom is so heavy it feels like armor. You move slower, breathe flatter. You find yourself staring at the same tapestry stitch for minutes. Not thinking, just existing. The maid asks if you're well. You nod. You're always well. That's the answer they want. Never tired, never frustrated, never angry. But let's be honest, you're angry. Not the fire and rebellion kind. The quiet kind. The dull, aching awareness that you are wasting in here. Not dying, just fading, like a painting left too long in the sun. There's a phrase in the castle. A well-kept lady is a quiet lady. You hear it often. It's not praise. It's instruction. Once you tried to keep a journal, just a few pages scribbled in secret, thoughts too sharp to stitch into linen. You hid it under your cushion. 2 days later, it was gone. Your maid said nothing, but the priest mentioned guarding the soul against idle musings during his next visit. Coincidence? Probably not. You look out the window. The courtyard is full of movement. Boys practicing swordplay, dogs barking, chickens scattering. You see your husband's steward shouting about something near the stables. You sigh. Even he gets to be loud. A fringe tradition says noblewomen in some parts of France used to hide their initials inside their tapestries. Not for pride, but as proof. I was here. A secret claim to a space that otherwise leaves no record of their thoughts. You start stitching your initials into the lower corner of St. Margaret's robe. Tiny, almost invisible, but it helps. By late afternoon, your eyes burn. You've threaded the same pattern 6 times and picked it out for. Someone brings wine. It's weak, but it warms your fingers. You close your eyes just for a second, just to imagine a world where women don't disappear into thread and quiet. Then the door creaks. Time to rise. The steward's wife is visiting. You smooth your skirts, place your hoop just so, and arrange your face into something polite. Another hour of quiet judgment begins. Privacy. The word sounds soft and luxurious, like fur-lined slippers or the last sip of honeyed wine. But in a castle, privacy isn't just rare. It's non-existent. You are never alone. Not when you eat. Not when you sleep. Not even when you relieve yourself. Welcome to noble life, where someone always sees, someone always hears, and someone is always ready to report. Your mornings begin with the soft knock of a maid entering your chamber, before you're even awake. She flutters around like a polite sparrow, straightening your sheets, laying out your shift, opening the shutters to let in a slice of damp air and the inevitable gossip. You've had the same routine for months, but she still tells you what each garment is just in case. Because small talk in the morning is apparently part of her duties. And once you're up, you're on display. Breakfast isn't a solitary cup of something warm by the fire. It's bread, fruit, and perhaps pottage, served in the presence of your ladies-in-waiting, your mother-in-law, of course, and sometimes a page boy who hasn't figured out where to look when a noblewoman bites into an apple. Hint: not at her mouth, child. You dress with assistance. You bathe with assistance. You receive letters and have them read aloud to you, because being literate doesn't mean you're allowed to show it off. Even your prayers are often shared, kneeling alongside others in the chapel, the creak of wood under knees making a chorus that somehow drowns your own thoughts. Want to cry? You'll need to do it silently behind a pillar in the space of time between vespers and embroidery. Want to scream? You could try, but you'll probably be labeled hysterical or in need of solitude, which, hilariously, means being confined to a room with even more supervision. Historians still argue whether noblewomen's lack of privacy was simply a reflection of medieval communal living or an intentional strategy to control and suppress individuality. Either way, the result is the same. Your life is curated by everyone but you. Let's talk about the lavatory. You'd think, being nobility, you'd at least get to use the garderobe in peace. Nope. The castle's primitive plumbing means the privy is shared, smelly, and located in a drafty chute that drops waste straight into the moat or a cesspit. You're escorted there. You're waited upon. You're even sometimes handed a perfumed cloth to hold over your nose. And no, you don't get to lock the door. There's a story about a countess who tried to relieve herself in solitude only to be walked in on by a priest who mistook the corridor. She didn't speak for 3 days out of embarrassment. The priest gave a sermon the following Sunday about the humility of the flesh. You cannot make this stuff up. Even when you write letters, if you're lucky enough to be permitted ink, you dictate them aloud. The scribe is usually male. He has opinions about your punctuation. Your ladies-in-waiting, meanwhile, are meant to be your companions. And they can be kind, loyal, even funny. But they're also eyes, ears, messengers for your husband, your mother-in-law, the priest, or whoever's most invested in keeping you properly ladylike. Your words travel faster than your feet. Once, you muttered a complaint about the salt being coarse. By dinner time, the steward offered you an apology, and the cook gave you the cold shoulder for a week. You've learned to smile through every bite since. There's a weird intimacy in always being watched, like you're both a noblewoman and a stage actress trapped in a never-ending play. Your gestures are graceful. Your tone is sweet. Your gaze is lowered. But inside, you're screaming in calligraphy. You learn to communicate in code. A longer than usual pause in prayer, anxiety, choosing saffron instead of teal, a silent rebellion, braiding your hair a little tighter than fashion dictates, a private way of saying, I'm holding myself together today. And it's not just humans who fill your space. There are animals everywhere. Dogs in the hall, cats in the kitchen, birds in cages by the solar windows. They all seem freer than you. Even the rooster gets to crow without judgment. Quirky tidbit. It was common for noblewomen to keep small lap dogs not just for companionship, but to help warm their laps in cold, drafty halls. So yes, you have a warm, fuzzy creature on your lap. No, it's not comforting when 6 people are still watching you drink your wine. Occasionally, someone knocks before entering your chamber. Usually a page who forgets to wait for permission. You could be in your shift, brushing out your hair, or, in today's case, removing a splinter from your foot. Doesn't matter. The door opens. You blink. He stammers, leaves, and the hallway laughs behind him. Privacy isn't privacy if it has to be earned. Sometimes your only solitude is at night, when the torches burn low and everyone else is asleep. You lie there, staring at the canopy above your bed, listening to the distant crackle of hearth embers and the occasional owl. It's not quiet, but it's less crowded. That's when you think about what you'd say if you could speak freely, about the questions you'd ask if you weren't worried they'd end up on someone else's tongue by morning, about how strange it is to live in a place so full of people and still feel so profoundly alone. And yet you adapt. You master the art of inner monologue. You invent entire conversations in your head. You rewrite your life like a poem no one else will ever read. And in those private thoughts, you are not just watched, you are known. If only by yourself. Because the truth is, being noble in a castle doesn't mean being powerful. It means being observed. Every moment, every move, every breath. Even now, someone is probably watching you as you yawn. Bath time. You'd think, being a noblewoman, this would be the one moment of comfort in your otherwise crowded, oversown, overly observed day. But don't get too excited, because bathing in a medieval castle is not scented candles and warm tile floors. It's once a month, if you're lucky, and more ordeal than indulgence. First of all, there's no bathroom. There's a room occasionally, but it's not built for bathing. The tub, if your castle even has one, is a heavy wooden barrel reinforced with iron bands, hauled into your chamber by servants who grunt and mutter about how the lady is feeling extravagant today. They fetch water from the kitchen hearth, meaning it takes forever to fill, and even longer to cool down into that lukewarm gray zone we now call tepid at best. You step in carefully, trying not to show how cold the floor is. Your lady-in-waiting steadies you. 2 more stand by to hold towels. And yes, someone is usually hovering with a bowl of herbs or rosewater, not for hygiene but for smell. Because nobody expects you to actually get clean. You sink into the water. It's not deep. It's not private. It smells like lavender, damp wool, and faintly of iron. The fire nearby crackles politely, but it's not enough to fight off the draft under the door. You shiver. Someone asks if you're comfortable. You lie. There's a fringe belief, especially among older castle women, that too much bathing opens the pores to disease. Better to be a little dirty than dead, they say. So, many noblewomen opt for the safer route. Minimal bathing, maximum perfume, and an aggressive use of linen underlayers to absorb sweat before it reaches the outer gown. Historians still argue whether the medieval world really feared bathing this much, or if that's an exaggeration spread by later writers. But one thing's certain, cleanliness wasn't a daily goal. It was a seasonal accomplishment. Between baths, your hygiene kit includes a linen cloth for dry rubbing, a tiny amount of soap, which smells more like bacon fat than flowers, a bone comb for dragging lice out of your hair, tooth powder made from crushed mint and ashes, a lot of prayers. Quirky detail, Some noblewomen would tuck dried herbs like rosemary or chamomile into their bodices or hairnets. Not for fashion, but to create a personal scent bubble. You haven't reached that level of aromatic armor yet, but it's tempting. Your hair, long and heavy, takes hours to dry, which is why you almost never wash it. You brush it instead. For so long, your maid once counted 70 strokes. She was bored. You were bored. Everyone was cold. Your underclothes aren't washed daily either. Laundry is labor-intensive and reserved for laundry days, which happen every 10 days or so. By then, your shift smells like stew, sweat, and sanctity. You endure. The castle itself isn't helping. It's damp, moldy, and full of corners where wind howls like it's auditioning for a ghost story. Rushes on the floor are meant to absorb messes, but they also trap smells. The great hall, half banquet, half barn. The solar, part sanctuary, part sneeze factory. So how do you deal with it? Layering. You wear 3 shifts. You switch them out when they stiffen from body oil. You rub your skin with linen cloths until it reddens. You dust your feet with crushed chalk. And if anyone dares sniff in your direction, you smile like royalty and pretend they're just overcome with admiration. And let's not forget menstruation. No sanitary pads, no plumbing, no breaks. You manage with rags, washed discreetly and dried behind tapestries. If you're lucky, you sit on your own designated monthly cushion. If not, you sit on folded cloaks and pray no one notices. There's a chambermaid whose sole job is to remove soiled linens before guests arrive. She does it quickly, quietly, and with the expression of someone who knows way too much about noblewomen's secrets. Occasionally, a visiting noblewoman brags about her private tub, brought from her father's estate and used monthly in a curtained alcove. Everyone nods politely and pretends not to notice that her hair still smells like goose fat. You smile and compliment the embroidery on her sleeves. Want to bathe more often? You'd need a note from your priest, your steward's permission to reroute firewood for hot water, and about 7 servants with nothing better to do. Or you could take a cold plunge in the river like the kitchen boys do. Except you'd be scandalized. Wet linen is basically medieval nudity, and when you do bathe, it's not relaxing. It's ceremonial. You're scrubbed like a relic. You're perfumed like a shrine. And afterward, everyone treats you like you've just returned from a vision quest. You think about modern spas. You don't know what a spa is, but you imagine a place where the water is always warm. The soap smells like dreams, and no one is staring at your elbows while you dry off. Instead, you step out of your tub wet and shivering. A towel is wrapped around you. Your feet leave damp prints on the rushes. Your gown is already laid out. Your maid combs your hair, muttering something about tangles. You nod. Say thank you. Pretend you don't miss your own thoughts. You sit by the fire to dry. The warmth barely reaches your shoulders. Someone knocks. The steward enters to discuss tomorrow's feast seating. You're still damp, still half-dressed, still never truly alone. And still you smile, because tomorrow is laundry day. It's feast day. The hall is bustling. Torches are lit, banners unfurled, and the air smells like roasted meat, boiled vegetables, and the faintest hint of burned bread. It's the social highlight of the month, and as a noblewoman, you're expected to be present, polished, and positively radiant. But let's make one thing clear right away. The feast is not for you. You walk in, adorned in layers of carefully draped silk, saffron undersleeves, and a circlet that pinches just enough to remind you not to slouch. A lady-in-waiting straightened your veil 3 times before letting you leave your chamber, and another powdered your face with crushed rice flour so you'd glow in the firelight. All of this effort, and you still have to sit below your husband at the table. You don't eat first. That honor goes to the Lord, then the high-ranking men of the court, then visiting clergy, then knights, and eventually you. And even then, your food is chosen for you. Want the roast swan? Too rich. The spiced fish? Not suitable for delicate constitutions. You're given a plate of boiled grains, a slice of turnip, and a hopeful ladle of broth. You chew slowly. Not because you're savoring it, though to be fair it's not awful, but because chewing too fast is vulgar. Talking with your mouth full is scandalous. Laughing too loudly? Practically sinful. Historians still argue whether noblewomen at feasts were allowed to engage freely or were expected to sit quietly and look ornamental. The truth, like most things, lies somewhere in between. Speak when spoken to, smile when appropriate, and never, ever outshine your husband's toast. You sip watered wine from a pewter goblet. Not too quickly, of course. Getting tipsy in public? That's for bawdy tavern girls, not daughters of estates. A knight across the table cracks a joke about a goat in the granary. The men roar. You offer a gentle chuckle, 2 seconds delayed. It's not that you didn't get it. It's that you weren't meant to respond right away. You're meant to hover at the edges of amusement, not participate in it. Meanwhile, servants race back and forth with trenchers. Thick slabs of stale bread used as edible plates. They pile meat and sauce on top, and when the food's gone, the bread is handed to the poor or fed to the dogs. You once tried to eat yours. A steward coughed loudly in disapproval. Your hands stay clean thanks to a damp cloth passed discreetly between courses. But the cloth smells faintly of vinegar and something musky, and you wonder how many other noblewomen have wiped their fingers on the same strip of linen today. Quirky fact: some noblewomen brought their own dining cloths, intricately embroidered napkins tied at the wrist or tucked into belts. They were less about hygiene and more about showing off. You don't have one, yet. You glance down the table at your mother-in-law. She's watching you. Not your posture, not your plate, but the corners of your mouth. Is your smile wide enough? Is your nod deferent enough? You reach for the bread again just to have something to do. The minstrels strike up a tune, something lilting and vaguely familiar. You nod along. Someone mentions court news. A duke's son has been betrothed. You murmur something appropriate. Fortunate match. A noble line. You feel your own corset pressing against your ribs like a silent warning. Stay composed. And still you're hungry. The food isn't bad, but it's small. Ladle-like portions. The men beside you tear into meat with greasy fingers. You break off tiny bites, chew delicately, and wonder how long before you can sneak a honey cake from the kitchens. You reach for a plum. Soft, ripe, perfect. You lift it toward your mouth and drop it onto your lap. It rolls down and lands beside your shoe. A maid rushes over, blushes, retrieves it, and whispers, "Shall I bring another?" You nod, mortified. 2 women nearby giggle behind their fingers. You take a breath, sip your wine, regroup. A new course arrives, pigeon pie with pepper and raisins. It looks delicious. You watch your husband nod in approval and stab into his slice. Yours, however, is served without the crust. Easier to digest, they say. Less uncouth. You begin to wonder if the kitchen even believes you want flavor. The conversation turns to falconry. You've never been allowed to hold a bird yourself, but you smile and offer the expected line. My cousin in Brittany keeps a fine goshawk. You've never met this cousin. You're not even sure where Brittany is. Doesn't matter. It sounds correct. Then a hiccup, a loud one, from your husband's youngest brother. The table pauses. He blushes. People laugh. You want to laugh. A real one. But you press your lips shut. You don't eat to satisfy hunger here. You eat to maintain control. A bite too large? Indelicate. A mouth too empty? Dull. Your fork, well, actually a 2-pronged trencher fork, not like the modern ones, must be held just so. Your napkin? Lightly dabbed, never wiped. A dog brushes against your leg under the table. You freeze. Is it sniffing for scraps or about to lift its leg? You glance down. It's the cook's mastiff. He stares at you with the patience of someone who knows you're going to drop something again. You resist the urge to give him the pigeon pie. The feast continues long into the evening. Torches sputter. Men get louder. Women grow quieter. The steward calls for silence before the final toast. You raise your goblet and echo the words, "To health, to land, to lineage." You barely taste the wine. When the hall finally begins to empty, your jaw aches from smiling. Your stomach growls, but softly. You make your way back to your chambers, unpinning your veil as you go. The moment you close the door behind you, you sigh, deep, full, and finally unobserved. You could eat something now, a crust of bread, a piece of cheese, but you're too tired. Maybe tomorrow, you think. Maybe then you'll be fed like a person. You're sitting by the window, sunlight slanting across the stone sill, fingers sore from stitching a vine that refuses to curve the way you want. Your mind drifts. You hum. Then a voice interrupts you. Soft, polite, and just a little too practiced. My lady, would you like to review your daughter's lessons today? You smile, nod, but inside you feel the familiar twist. Education, when it's for you, is rationed like sugar in a famine. Welcome to noblewoman schooling. Just enough to pray, obey, and look decorative at dinner. Anything more? A danger to your marriage prospects. Your earliest lessons began around the age of 7. You learned your prayers in Latin, memorized family trees, especially your husband's, practiced reading from scripture, but not writing, not in ink. That was a skill for monks, scribes, and the occasional precocious male heir. You were allowed to copy passages, yes, but only under supervision, and never anything opinionated. Instead, your curriculum was curated with the elegance of a doily. Sewing, etiquette, music, a bit of herbal lore, and how to sit for hours without slouching, all while smiling like you didn't want to throw your psalter out the window. Historians still argue whether some noblewomen achieved advanced literacy, especially those destined for convents or power. There are letters, chronicles, and even treatises attributed to women. But for every educated nun, there are hundreds of wives whose minds were trained to remain politely blank. Take your lute lessons. You know the notes. Your fingers remember the scales. But no one encourages composition. That's not your role. You're here to perform, not create. Even your embroidery follows pre-drawn patterns. Heaven forbid you innovate a stitch. Quirky fact. Some noblewomen hid secret messages in needlework, not just initials. A bird facing west, for example, might signal homesickness. You wonder if anyone notices the four-pointed star you've tucked behind the Virgin Mary's halo. When you try to learn more, by asking questions, for instance, it backfires. A few weeks ago, you asked the visiting friar about the structure of Aristotle's logic. He blinked, smiled, and then offered you a tract on the virtues of silent womanhood. You thanked him. You didn't read it. The boys in the household, they get tutors, one-on-one time with real scholars. They learn Latin poetry, military history, astronomy, and even mathematics. You overheard your brother-in-law reciting Euclid last week while throwing breadcrumbs to a goose. You knew better than to interrupt. And heaven help you if you speak French too fluently. That's suspiciously courtly. English too fluently? That's dangerously clever. You're allowed to speak, but only in moderation. Too sharp a tongue, and suddenly you're the next troublesome woman to be married off to some gray-bearded widower who lives on the edge of nowhere. You're expected to raise children. But no one teaches you how. Sure, you know lullabies. And yes, there are herbal guides to swaddling, teething, and weaning. But actual parenting? That's left to wet nurses, governesses, and the occasional whispered warning from your mother-in-law about corrupting your daughter with too much praise. Your daughter is 5. She watches you today as you thread a new needle. You hand her a piece of linen, and she grins like it's a toy. It's not. It's a test, and you both know it. You think about teaching her to read properly, in secret, maybe by candlelight. But then you remember the scribe who got dismissed last spring for overfamiliarity, after gifting a young page a book of riddles. And suddenly the idea seems less romantic, more risky. You sigh, turn back to the window. A bird hops across the stone ledge, fat, brown, unconcerned with your inner turmoil. It's free. You're not. But at least you can recognize its genus. That's something. There are pockets of resistance. You've met women at feast days who talk in subtle codes. They quote obscure verses, make sly jokes about Roman tragedies. One duchess wore a brooch shaped like Minerva's owl. You complimented it. She said, "Some of us must keep our minds sharp, even if we cannot wield swords." Stuck with you. But even rebellion has rules. You can't be seen studying. So you tuck interesting fragments into memory like pebbles into a pouch. You recall a line of Chaucer, a verse from Hildegard, a metaphor from a saint's dream. These are your library shelves, hidden behind your eyes. And then there's the priest. He visits once a week, talks of sin, obedience, and the beauty of simplicity. You nod. You always nod. Last time, he caught you holding a scroll of poetry. You claimed it was a psalm. He smiled, warned you gently. Curiosity is the mother of heresy. You never saw the scroll again. Sometimes you wonder what you could have learned. Could you have written poetry? Mapped the stars? Taught others? Could you have been the scholar, not the student? The writer, not the reader? But those doors are closed to you, heavy as the castle gate. So you do what you can. You teach your daughter that lilies symbolize purity, but roses carry secrets. You show her how to hem a gown and how to question a proverb. You let her hold your prayer book upside down until she asks why it looks funny. You whisper answers the way you wish someone had whispered to you. And you keep learning, quietly, inwardly, always, because they can limit your ink, your scrolls, your tutors, but not your mind. Not really. You wake up to the sharp cry of a baby. It's not your baby. Not this time. But the sound still makes your chest tighten with something primal and heavy. In a castle, childbirth isn't just personal. It's political, dangerous, and, frankly, terrifying. You remember your own first labor. The chamber darkened, candles lit not for ambience, but to keep away demons. Because yes, the belief was that labor pains attracted unclean spirits. A crucifix hung above the bed. A bowl of blessed salt stood at your feet. And around you, women. So many women. The midwife took charge, but your mother-in-law hovered like an uninvited saint. Your ladies whispered prayers. Someone offered you a piece of iron to grip, to keep your soul anchored. You bit it. It didn't help. The pain came in waves, relentless and raw. There was no anesthesia, no forceps, no idea if you or the child would survive. Every contraction felt like judgment. And no, there was no doctor. Physicians were for the battlefield. For noble women, childbirth was the battlefield. Historians still debate whether medieval noblewomen had higher maternal mortality rates than peasant women. On one hand, you had better food, more attendants, and private rooms. On the other, you were expected to produce heirs, often and young, and that meant frequent pregnancies, sometimes a dozen or more. Not every body survives that. You bled. A lot. You prayed. Even more. And when the baby finally arrived, red, wrinkled, and screaming, the entire room gasped like the second coming had just occurred. It was a boy. Everyone exhaled. That meant you could stay married, respected, fed. But the child didn't stay with you long. The wet nurse took him. You were told to rest, to lie still while others cared for your own son. Because in noble households, a mother's role was less about bonding, more about breeding. You wept, quietly. The nurse told you it was normal. You hated that word. Sometimes you saw your child between feedings, dressed in embroidered swaddling, held by another woman, with barely a glance in your direction. They said it was better that way. A healthy child needs a calm mother. The steward reminded you. You weren't calm. You were hollowed. And then came the fear. Infant mortality is just a phrase now. But then, it was an expectation. Half of all babies didn't survive past their first year. Fevers, teething infections, sudden sleep. It didn't take much. And if the baby stopped crying, the silence felt louder than any wail. You watched your second child die before her baptism. A girl. No name. Just a wail, then stillness. The priest arrived late. They buried her in unconsecrated ground behind the chapel. You weren't allowed to attend. They told you to rejoice. She's with the angels. You clenched your fists under your veil. Quirky truth? Some women stitched stars into their sleeves during pregnancy to mark the weeks. You still have a gown with 7 faint stars sewn in gold thread. You never finished the 8th. Your surviving son, now 5, lives in the nursery tower. You see him once a week. He greets you formally, bows, kisses your hand. You ache for a real hug, but it's unseemly to show too much maternal emotion. You smile instead. Ask about his Latin. He tells you about his falcon, the one you paid for, trained and named. He doesn't remember, and yet you try again, because you must. Your status depends on heirs, preferably male, healthy, and obedient. The castle's future sits in your womb. Every pregnancy is a gamble, every child a risk, and every time you bleed, you wonder if this will be the last time you ever do anything. The birthing chamber is still kept ready. Herbs dry on hooks. The blessed spoon sits near the pillow. A small knife lies under the mattress, not for cutting cord, but for spiritual protection. Iron wards off demons, they say. You sleep with it nearby. Midwives whisper to each other about your hips. Narrow, one said last winter. Strong, another countered. As if your body were farmland, and they were deciding if the next crop would survive the frost. You've tried to learn more. There's a book, hidden in a nun's library, about women's secrets. You once saw it when visiting a priory. You turned the pages like they were relics. Diagrams, remedies, warnings. You committed what you could to memory. You weren't allowed to copy it. You envy the nuns sometimes. Their silence, their knowledge, their freedom from pregnancy. But then you remember the cold of their cells, the rigid rules, the prayers at midnight. It's not freedom, it's just a different prison. So you stay, you bleed, you bear, and you watch your children grow in someone else's arms. Today you hear that another noblewoman, a cousin, died in childbirth. Her name was Elena. She was 17. They say she passed peacefully. You know better. There's no peaceful way to bleed out on straw, begging for your mother while your attendants argue over how to close the womb. You light a candle for her, not in the chapel but in your room, behind a tapestry. You don't pray aloud. You just stare at the flame and wonder how many candles it would take to keep you safe. But deep down you already know the answer. There is no safety, only the next contraction. You speak, once, briefly, at supper. You mention that the steward has miscalculated the grain stores. Too much barley, not enough rye. It's not a complaint. It's not even criticism. It's a simple observation. But the moment the words leave your mouth, the temperature in the room shifts like someone opened a window in January. Your husband clears his throat. Your mother-in-law stiffens. A servant drops a spoon. You've crossed a line. In the world outside your tower walls, speaking truth might earn you respect. In here, it's a gamble. Say too little, you're a docile doll. Say too much, and suddenly, you're dangerous. They call it outspoken, sharp-tongued, unladylike. And the punishment is not always exile. Sometimes it's just erasure. Your voice begins to vanish in conversations. Your opinion is no longer sought. Your presence dims like a snuff taper. But worse still is the alternative. Say nothing ever and disappear anyway. Historians still debate how much power noblewomen truly wielded. Some were regents. Some managed estates during wartime. But for every Eleanor of Aquitaine, there were thousands more whose influence was limited to polite smiles and embroidery patterns. You, for the record, do not want to manage an army. But you do want to be heard. And that is its own rebellion. There's a game that women in courtly circles sometimes play, not openly, of course. It's about how to speak without speaking. You lace your meaning into metaphor. You cloak advice in compliments. You express warning through gentle concern. Your friend Matilda, for example, once advised a neighboring lady not to trust a certain knight. But all she said was, "He speaks with honey on his tongue. Do bees not also sting?" Everyone laughed. One person understood. The knight in question left the castle by the next moon. It's code. It's exhausting, but it's survival. And then there's the other path, the darker one. You've heard the whispers. Women who spoke too freely, too forcefully, too often. What happens to them? They become legends. Or they become witches. No, really, that's the word they use. Witch. Not for cauldrons or curses, though those rumors help, but for women who do not bend. Midwives, herbalists, widows with strong wills. Anyone inconvenient. Quirky truth? In some regions, a widow who lived alone and spoke Latin was twice as likely to be accused of sorcery. Because what else could explain a woman surviving without a man? You imagine it, living alone in a cottage near the woods. A garden. Silence. No corset. It sounds more like retirement than damnation. But castles are terrified of women who do not ask permission. So you learn to perform. You praise the feast even when it's cold. You smile at the priest, even when his sermon implies your soul is weaker by design. You compliment the new tapestry, even though the unicorn snout is clearly embroidered upside down. And when a visiting knight interrupts you mid-sentence, you laugh softly and say, "Forgive me. I do forget myself." Everyone nods, pleased, safe. But inside you grit your teeth, because you do remember yourself. You remember the girl who used to dream of court debates, of influencing decisions, of being consulted rather than cautioned. That girl still lives here. She just speaks in footnotes now. Sometimes you wonder what would happen if you stopped pretending. If you stood up at the high table and simply said, "No, no, I won't wear that veil. No, I don't want another child. No, I won't kneel to your vanity." You fantasize about it the way some dream of escaping over castle walls. But then the candles flicker, the moment passes, and you're back at your needlework, stitching violets into a hem because someone said they suit your quiet nature. You think about your daughters. What will their silence cost them? You make small changes, tiny rebellions. You tell them stories where the clever girl wins. You teach them to question proverbs. You show them how to fake obedience long enough to carve out space. It's not freedom, but it's something. And if they call you strange, proud, or too serious, you let them. Because strange women survive. Proud women teach. Serious women leave records. One day, when you're older, widowed perhaps, you might gain a kind of twisted freedom. A manless woman is suspicious, but also untethered. You'll wear darker clothes. Sit at council meetings. Speak a little more plainly. Until then, you count your words like coins, spend them carefully, and hide a few for yourself. Because the choice isn't between witch or widow. It's between being seen and being safe. It's winter, and the castle is quiet, but not peaceful. You stand by the window of your chamber, watching the horizon darken. There's movement beyond the forest. Not deer, not clouds, men, armed, approaching. The servant who brought the news tried to be calm, but his hands were shaking. He said it plainly, "My lady, riders are coming. We think it's war." Your stomach knots. When war comes to a castle, it doesn't knock politely. It arrives like a wolf, snarling, hungry, indifferent to who it devours first. You weren't raised for this. Not really. You were taught to mend sleeves, not strategize defenses. But now your husband is away, summoned weeks ago by the king. And just like that, you are the highest-ranking soul in these stone walls. The steward seeks your counsel. The chaplain offers prayers. The guards look to you for calm. And you feel the weight of every one of their expectations settle on your collarbone like chainmail. You order the gates barred, the archers posted, provisions checked. But a castle is not impenetrable, especially not from within. You pace the hall where your children sleep. You check the nursery door. You pull the blankets up under their chins, wondering if they'll understand why the shutters are nailed closed and why the milk tastes of ash from smoke drifting in through the stones. Historians still argue how much military authority noblewomen held during sieges. Some accounts describe valiant defenses led by widowed countesses. Others suggest women were swiftly pushed aside once real fighting began. The truth? It probably depended on the woman. You don't want to be a hero. You want to survive. You know what happens when enemies breach a castle. You've heard the stories, the ones people don't tell during feast days. Looting, burning, and worse. You are not just a noblewoman. You are a symbol. Your body is a message. To take you is to shame your husband, your house, your bloodline. And the men outside your walls know that. You prepare. You sew a pouch of herbs to wear under your dress. Rue, wormwood, and cloves, not because they'll protect you, but because they remind you of your mother. She once said the scent of clove oil could calm even a screaming infant. Maybe it will do the same for you. You hide a small dagger beneath your pillow. It's ceremonial, meant for cutting meat at table, but it's sharp. You whisper to yourself that it's only precaution. But you also write a letter. To your husband, yes, but really to anyone who might find it. You describe the attackers. You mark the date. You add the names of those inside the walls. You don't sign it with your title. Just your name, as if you might matter on your own. You order the castle's women to gather in the chapel. Not because it's safer, it's not, but because it feels right. Stone, candlelight, sacred space. You kneel among them, hold their hands, sing with a voice that trembles. The bells ring at dusk, not for mass, for warning. You hear shouting from the walls, steel on wood, horses screaming, and then the thunder of fists against the gates like a nightmare come to life. You don't run. You move through the corridors like a ghost, checking doors, counting heads, issuing orders with a voice that doesn't sound like yours. You tell one servant to take the children through the postern gate if the front falls. You tell another to burn the family banner before anyone else can. You return to your chamber and change your dress. Not out of vanity but readiness. Plainer gown. One that can't be used to drag you by. You remove your jewelry. Not to save it, just to keep it from being ripped off. Quirky fact? Some noblewomen wore iron keys at their belts during wartime to signal control of the keep. You find yours. It's heavy, cold. You clip it on. Then silence. Not peace. That awful pause before the arrow flies, before the crash of splintering wood, before your world shatters like fired clay. You listen, and then, miraculously, the gates hold. The attackers retreat. This time, you sit down. Your knees shake. You don't cry. You just stare at your palms, half expecting them to be covered in blood. You survived a siege without a sword. But you'll never forget what it means to be bait. The frost has thawed. Spring returns to the land, and with it, the pulse of castle life quickens. Merchants arrive with wares, scribes with news, and gossip with long legs and louder voices. But beneath the buds and blossoms, your world remains a cage. Only now it's gilded in ivy. You walk through the garden, the small one walled off and private. You know every herb, every path, every stone that shifts beneath your slipper. It's the only space you control entirely. And even then, a maid watches from the archway, pretending to pick lavender. You kneel by the marjoram and pretend you don't notice. This garden, though modest, is your sanctuary, your escape, and your performance stage. Every noblewoman is expected to know her plants, not just for cooking, but for healing, for symbolism, for the quiet language women use when words aren't safe. You tend the rosemary, remembrance.
The rue, regret.
The violets, modesty. Each plant a footnote in your unspoken diary. But even here, you're not free. A foreign nobleman visits the castle this month. He's widowed, wealthy, and just barely older than your father. You hear the whispers before you see his face. He seeks a new wife. He values quiet and obedience. He has 3 sons already. The implication hangs in the air like perfume. You are suitable. You do not want this. But what you want is almost never consulted. Your husband has debts. Your dowry could be repurposed through remarriage. It's a transaction, gold for silence, land for lineage. Historians still debate the autonomy noblewomen had in second marriages. Some negotiated terms, even insisted on keeping their own estates. Others were bartered like heirloom chalices. You resolve not to go quietly. You gather your tools, needle, thread, parchment scraps, and begin preparing your own record. Not a journal. That could be found. Tapestry. It begins simply. A bird in flight. Then a castle wall. Then a key. Symbols only you understand, but threaded in such a way that another woman might guess. It's not much, but it's yours. Quirky fact. Some noble women stitched messages into the linings of their gowns. Love letters. Warnings. Spells. One was said to have sewn "God help me" in silver thread beneath her hem before being sent to a convent. You wonder if anyone ever found it. The foreign nobleman arrives. He smiles. You curtsy. He hands you a token. A brooch shaped like a lion's head. You accept it with fingers like ice. Later, you bury it in the garden beneath the thyme. You aren't rude. You're just firm. You speak politely. You smile sparingly. You spend as much time as possible at prayer. Eventually, he shifts his gaze elsewhere, perhaps to the younger cousin, or the widow from the next county. It doesn't matter. You are no longer the favored match. You breathe, but your reprieve doesn't last long. A messenger arrives, parchment sealed in wax, carried from the royal court. You are summoned, not for punishment, for pageantry, a festival, a wedding. You're to attend as a lady-in-waiting, presentable, polished, and prepared to be displayed like an ornate goblet in the great hall. You pack your things. It's not exile, but it feels like a reminder, we see you. Stay within the frame we gave you. The journey takes days. Your carriage bumps and rattles over rutted roads. At inns, men stare too long. At chapels, women avert their eyes. You arrive exhausted, powdered, smiling. And the court is dizzying. Silks rustle. Lutes strum. Perfume chokes the air. Everyone is watching everyone. And yet you've never felt more invisible. You do your duty. You hold a train.
You pour wine.
You dance once, with a baron who tells you your hair looks like candlelight, and then you retreat to your quarters and scrub his words off your skin with rough linen. You miss your garden. You miss your real name, the one your sister used to whisper to you during thunderstorms. But most of all, you miss being able to think without someone expecting something. When you return, the castle seems smaller, the guards younger, your chamber colder, but your garden is exactly as you left it. The thyme has spread, the rosemary blossoms, and under a flat stone near the wall, you find a tiny pouch with your embroidery needles, tucked exactly where you left them. You add to the tapestry that night, crescent moon, a closed door, a girl with her back to both. It's not defiance, it's memory, and sometimes that's the strongest resistance of all. You're older now, not old exactly, but your hair has silver threads in it, and when you stand too quickly, your knees complain. The castle, once so massive and intimidating, has shrunk around you like a dress washed too many times. You know its sounds, its shadows, its smells. And in some strange way, it knows you too. You are no longer watched quite so closely. Young maids pass you with reverence. Pages bow. Your husband nods when you speak, though whether it's out of respect or habit is anyone's guess. Your children are mostly grown. One married, one apprenticed to the court. The others are still half wild, chasing each other through the upper halls. You are not free, but you are less bound. Your days are slower, your hands stiffer, but your mind, sharper than ever. You've learned when to speak and when to feign deafness. You know how to bend rules just far enough that they don't snap. And you've learned that legacy isn't always written in ink or carved in stone. Sometimes, it's in the stories whispered between maids, the herbal remedies passed without ceremony, the stitched initials in the corner of a child's tunic. You've become a keeper of those stories. Women come to you now, quietly, in pairs or alone. They ask for advice, for tinctures, for understanding. You never call it what it is, power, but in your bones, you know. You've become what the younger women secretly hope to grow into, useful. Not just pretty, not just polite. You wear darker gowns now. Plum, indigo, russet. They say it's dignified. You say it's practical, it hides wine stains and ash better. But really, you just like the way it makes people listen when you speak. Historians still argue whether noblewomen found freedom in age. Some suggest they simply faded into the background. Others insist it was the moment they finally stepped forward. You don't care for the debate. You're living the answer. Quirky truth. In some regions, older noblewomen were tasked with keeping the castle keys. Not symbolically, literally. You have your own ring now. 11 iron teeth that open every chamber except the treasury. But you know where those are kept too. You walk the halls at dusk, checking latches, comforting weeping girls, tightening loose braids, adjusting crooked crucifixes. You're a ghost and a guardian. And sometimes you like it that way. There are moments of softness. Your granddaughter climbs into your lap with a book. She can't read yet, but she pretends. You listen. She turns the pages upside down, invents stories that make no sense and all the sense in the world. You ask her questions. Not to correct, but to encourage. You say, "And then what?" Like it's a magic spell. You remember what it felt like to not be asked that. You keep writing, sort of. You've hidden your true tapestry in the panel behind the hearth. It's grown too large to carry easily. It tells your story without showing your face. Vines wind into words. Symbols hide names. Every stitch an act of remembering. No one knows it's there, but you do. And on nights when the wind howls and the fire flickers like it might leave you in the dark, you sit in your old chair and trace the embroidery with your fingers like reading Braille from your own soul. You sleep better now. Not because you're safe. Safety is a myth you no longer believe in, but because you've made peace with your story. You weren't born to lead armies. You didn't write laws. You didn't change the world. But you endured it. And in castles, sometimes that's enough. So now the halls are quiet. The torches burn low. The hearth's fire has become a nest of amber coals. You sit still, blanket wrapped around your shoulders, the sound of the wind tapping at the shutters like a memory trying to get back in. You breathe slowly, evenly, as if exhaling centuries. The castle, for all its harsh stone and harsher rules, has softened in the dark. The tapestries no longer judge. The footsteps no longer echo with urgency. And outside your window, the moon stretches across the fields like spilled milk. You think of the girls who came after you, the ones who sat where you sat, walked where you walked, dreamed through the same narrow slits of sky. And you hope, wherever they ended up, they got to laugh loudly. Run barefoot. Speak without consequence. Your fingers rest on your lap, motionless now. The ring of keys still hangs at your side. Not because you must carry them, but because they remind you that once, someone trusted you to keep the doors closed, and more importantly, to open them. Tonight, no one knocks, no one cries, and for the first time in a long time, you feel the stillness not as a punishment, but as a gift. You close your eyes, not in sorrow, not in fear, but in rest, because you have carried the weight of duty, of silence, of centuries. And now, for just this moment, the world asks nothing more of you than to let go. Let the stone breathe around you. Let the walls hold your name gently. And let the night carry you somewhere quiet, somewhere warm, somewhere free.